We have returned to open session. For those watching at home tonight, you might notice that we are not wearing masks this evening, given that we are now in Phase 5 in Illinois. All members of the board and those present are vaccinated. We are not wearing masks in times when none are required. So might look a little different to folks at home. Looks a little different to us in here, but it's good to see everybody's face again. All right, so our first item on the agenda is to open the session of public hearing for amending the fiscal 2021 budget. Is there a motion that the board open a budget hearing for amending the fiscal year 2021 budget?
So moved.
Second.
Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay, Mr. Barsati?
Aye.
Mr. Muirhead?
Aye.
Ms. Gunn?
Aye.
Ms. Clyber?
Aye.
Mr. Marhold?
Aye.
And Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Hearing's open.
All right, at this time, are there the floor is open for any board member to discuss the budget or propose any changes. All right, are there any community members' comments or questions? All right, if there are no comments or questions, is there a motion that the board close the budget hearing for amending the fiscal year 2021 budget?
So moved.
Second.
Kathy, can you call the roll?
Mr. Muirhead?
Aye.
Ms. Gunn?
Aye.
Ms. Clyber?
Aye.
Mr. Marhold?
Aye.
Mr. Barsati?
Aye.
And Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Hearing is closed.
All right, I'm realizing I skipped over an item here. Is there any public comment or any public comment at this
There is
time?
not.
Okay. All right, at this time, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? All right, if not, we will move to the superintendent's report.
All right, this does feel weird to not have the microphone and my mask and all that, but a couple things. Certainly want to share that, as you all know, our school year, the 2020-21 school year ended on June 10th, just last Thursday. And I tried to sort of think about how to reflect on the year. I think really all I want to say is just a huge thank you to the Board of Education, to any teachers that might be listening or listen to the recording later, to our parents, to really the whole community for making this school year happen. As we know, it was probably one of the most strange school years we've ever had. I think it'll go on record, obviously, for all of the social distancing and hybrid learning, remote learning, back to in-person learning, contact tracing, saliva screening, et cetera, et cetera. So just a huge thank you. I feel, on behalf of really our entire district, a huge sense of accomplishment and celebration, having made it through the many, many challenges that this year brought. And I know it brought those changes to our families and to our students as well. And just to share kind of a cute anecdote, I was interviewing one of our teacher candidates who'd been a long-term sub with us all year, and she said, it was second grade, and she said that they were reflecting at the end of the year the best part of the school year. And children share that the best part of the school year is when everybody started to come to school. So I'm really thinking about that April time frame and how powerful and I think probably how normal that really started to feel for our students during a year that had been so very abnormal. So again, just a huge thank you to everybody. It was a heavy lift and we got there together. So thank you and thank you. As you know, our sort of celebration elation is short. We move quickly into our plans for the coming school year, and I find myself thinking about post-pandemic, and we really won't be post-pandemic, but I do think we're going to be in a much better situation than we were last summer in trying to plan for this past school year. So one of the things I want to take just a few minutes and share some enrollment information. As you know, that's sort of one of our typical things we do during the summer months is we look at our enrollment and how, in particular, we pay a lot of attention to our kindergarten and first grade enrollment numbers. So I have all that information available to you. We will continue to be using our student assignment algorithm. As you know, it takes into account a child's distance from school as well as the capacity and enrollment at each of our schools in our effort to do the best we can with this flexible boundaries where the boundaries are not tight and solid in this community, where we take some flexibility, particularly around those edges. And as you all know, our algorithm creates kind of dots on the map, right, that to help us look at where are those most densely populated areas. Our goal is to continue to move enrollment toward Blythe School as we move that school to a 2-section school, because that really alleviates some of the crowding that we've had at Central and Ames School. Looking to do as much as we possibly can for Hollywood students who have to cross First Avenue if they're to be transferred to not have to do that, as much as we can balance the enrollments over at Hollywood. So right now our enrollment, our kindergarten enrollment for the 21-22 school year looks favorable in regard to that. I have some comparison data for the board to take a look at. I think it's just important to point out that we're looking at sort of this early June enrollment compared to a late August, early September enrollment. So what we know about school district enrollment is a lot of new children typically come in and enroll. Right now, sort of the June, July, August, for people that are listening or people that have neighbors that might need the nudge or the reminder, it really does help us for families to get in and register and enroll as quickly as possible, just so that we can do the best possible work in terms of balancing all those enrollments. So I don't know if there's any questions about the enrollment data so far or our process. It's starting to feel kind of more predictable, which is really helpful, and the algorithm is still a very helpful tool for us to have.
So I do just have one question, Martha. The title says anticipated enrollment, but are the numbers for 21, 22 the actual numbers that we have right now?
They are the actual numbers. We just feel like they're probably not complete because
Right,
not,
right, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, for August, I
Right.
did it once in August.
We tend to get a lot at the last minute,
Yeah.
which is always a challenge. So as much as people who are moving new to town or just haven't come in to register and enroll, it is important to come in and make that happen. Our policy states that families are informed of their student assignment for any new students. They're informed of the school in which they'll be assigned to by June 30th. So we're working on that, and families will have that communication to them. And then for our kindergarten students, they will also be told if they're AM or PM at that same time. That was something that had come later, and we keep working to move that up so that families can address those needs as best as possible, given the information that they receive from us here by June 30th.
Martha, just a quick question on the kindergarten numbers. I recognize more might, come to us over the summer. But point in time, is this about comparable to the numbers as they were in June or July of last year?
Yeah,
So they usually increase by 20 or 30
Right,
over the
it's
summer?
a great question, and I don't have an exactly clear-cut answer. It seems like our feeling is, and sometimes it's just that, is that it's maybe a little lower than what we've had in the past, but every time I say that, then influx of students show up in July. So yeah, it's a little hard to make that direct, like June to June comparison when the number that we sort of track most carefully is then what's going on at the very beginning of the new school year.
So around that kindergarten appointment date on the 30th, now, I know there's been some communication coming in from parents about, is this something that could be released earlier? Is there a rationale behind the date of June 30th, and then what happens to folks who are registering after?
Yeah, so anybody that registers after June 30th will get an assignment then as quickly as possible afterwards. So then it kind of becomes a rolling issue. I think it's a great question, Dan, and I know it's something I've thought about a lot over the years. I mean, the algorithm helps us with predictability. It helps us sort of, again, just sort of evaluate those numbers. What happens is if we're running the algorithm, let's say in April, then we run it again in May, and then we run it again in June, and we've contemplated that, like, should we do that just as registrations roll in, is that we sort of don't have that mass of students who are ready to be placed, so that we're more likely to potentially under-enroll or over-enroll a specific school. So you kind of need to wait until you have some sense of our kindergarten enrollment and then make those assignments. I'm certainly, I continue to think about that. I do think this is challenging for families to not necessarily know their school until late June, for them not to know an AM or PM sectioning until late June. So it's something I'd like to continue to think about. It's something I've thought about relative to our new strategic plan goal, just around engaging families in the process. We know, many of you experienced it. It's conversations we've had anecdotally along the way. Experienced this even in your own children's placement in their home school when you moved to Riverside or came to the community. So Yeah, I wish there was a simpler way. I wish there was a faster way. I wish that we could make these assignments more quickly in the spring. But I don't see that. I don't see how we do that unless we had like that firm boundary issue. Then that becomes more predictable. I know I dug into a lot of history when we started with this process, and I know at different times District 96 has tried to name firm boundaries. Maybe if we fell into a really predictable pattern and got Blythe to a 2-section school, is there something now by using the algorithm, by looking at the plot, the sort of literally the compilation of sort of where the students are residing and how they're placed, would that allow us over time to look at a boundary line? Maybe?
Martha, I think you've hit on two of the essential issues. One is the idea of the boundary line, which I admit is very appealing. It's something I actually would prefer, but the challenge of maintaining similar sized classrooms. And unless you know what population we're serving, there's no way to distribute them evenly. So you have to have that knowledge, and that pushes you later into the July. It really does. Without knowing ahead of time, you can't do a distribution.
It feels like hard boundary lines would be difficult for that exact reason. It will continue to be until, facilities are done, so to speak, and like we know, like no more building, no more adjustments. But one thing I was thinking about, I was going to ask the same question, Dan. I wonder, because I appreciate what you're saying, like trying to have the entire mass and then distribute them, but I almost wonder if there would be an incentive for enrolling immediately if by early June, these 139 families know and can plan, and if you were just dragging your feet, then you're just going to get put wherever there's room. And if you live on the far south side of town and you get put, at Ames or something because that's where space is, then or if you move in late, you're just going to have to kind of suck it up. Might not be the best way to say it, but I wonder if that would encourage more enrollment. And I look at all the houses for sale and all the turnover in the younger families, and they're not all kindergartners, but I wonder if that would be an incentive for people, and then those that actually do it get the benefit of knowing their placement in their school and can plan more accordingly. I don't know if it's feasible.
Yeah.
But
We had that discussion.
Yeah, we had that discussion, and anecdotally, based on my experience and others, so when we first moved into Riverside, that was what our thought was, that if you registered early, you would get your school. And so we were like, my wife was, I think, the second person registering our daughter. So I do think that would incentivize people. I guess I don't know, and I would agree, incentivize people to step up to the plate.
I think we had a conversation about, it was an issue about what do you do then when you buy a home in Riverside and you expect to know if you're a reasonable proximity to a school that there's a good chance you will have that child go to a school. And so we had those talks when we were talking about the algorithm and what is really the fairest or not. If you move in August, does that mean that you're not allowed to go to that school because you're not registering in May? And so it was also a philosophical
Right, and it's like, what if
discussion
you are the
about
one
what
who
is-
lives exactly across
what is
the
fair
street
for a
right now?
taxpayer to expect when they move into a community. But I do like the idea of incentivizing early enrollment, of course, and we tried to do that even with kindergarten now to get them. But that was a huge discussion that we had. And
Right, and we do incentivize with a lower registration fee, kind of an early bird registration, a
That's right.
discount. I don't know, I think families who are in town, ready to register and enroll and kind of, know the process, I think they do jump in early. I think they do try to help us out. And then remember too, if you have a sibling at the school already, you are not what we call assignable. You are
Right.
automatically going to go per policy to the school where
To the
your
school where you're
older
at.
sibling is already attending. We're not going to split families up, so.
That remains true even if they're moving within town, is that correct?
It's interesting, the way we wrote the policy is that once placed in a school, children have the opportunity to finish out their time there. And so it's come up a few times when families move within District 96, does that mean that they get to stay? And we've been letting families stay if that's their preference, and there's, again, sort of that availability of space. It's interesting. I don't think that was our intention in the policy, but when I go back and interpret it with a family, now there's also families that move and say, we are now closer to Central or closer to Ames or Blythe or Hollywood. We'd like our child to make that change. And that, so it's been kind of choice more or less, but with that predictability of you have the option to stay.
And I think that had to do with, for the benefit of the child as well. I mean, for that, if the child really, really had a connection to their teachers and their other students, and to pull that from them because of an inter-village move might harm their education as well. So we had to talk about what's reasonable, and I kind of like that you were flexible and let the families work that out, as long as there was space, of course.
Right. We have
Contingent on an opening.
right. I think, as you all know, we removed the class size numbers from our policy, but with a clear commitment that small class sizes make a difference in terms of student learning, and it's our goal to continue to preserve small class sizes. The number that we have not gone beyond, and we even struggled with this number during the pandemic when we brought children back in April, was we have not gone beyond 25 in an elementary classroom. Our previous policy numbers had been 20 for K through 2, and then or K through 3, and then 23 for 24 or grades 4 and 5. So I think those are still good, really good guidelines. We continue to look at those as guidelines. Just sometimes we've had those slightly larger class sizes really at all the schools. It's not, I know sometimes we think it's a Hollywood thing. I think that this year I look at that, there's going to be some of that at Blythe, but there's going to be some of that at Ames and Central too. So again, as much as we work to balance, it's not a perfect system. I think the algorithm makes it more predictable and more manageable, and in that way, and therefore then I think we can improve our communications to families, et cetera. So.
Well, I think really the big issue is kindergarten. And that's what comes up year over year over year. I heard it for 2 or 3 years before my kids are in the district. I experienced it, and it's been happening since. Am I going to be AM or PM? I don't think, if you have a first grader, you know your kid's going to go to a school from this time. And it's really more that kindergarten of, am I AM or PM? And really, there is not a lot of options if you're in the PM. There's not a lot of AM options. If you're in the AM, there was more PM options, but as we've heard recently, the YMCA shut their thing down, and I know from just talking to a couple of the daycare, childcare for pre-elementary childcare facilities, they like the stability. They don't look at, a lot of them don't look at themselves as just a daycare where you come in kindergarten then you leave, and so there's some hesitancy to provide like a service that directly aligns, and then the half-day thing doesn't really work with their models. I mean, it would be nice if we could figure something out with Riverside Parks or some other organization that would be able to help fill that gap, but then you've got DCFS I mean, it's a mess when you really think about it. So I think really the early enrollment, kind of as I was saying, it was looking at the kindergarten piece of it to say, all right, by this date, if you've enrolled by this date, we can at least place you so you can figure out your child care issues, and then everybody that kind of comes after that is just going to have to figure it out, and we can try to help facilitate some of the partnerships or a partnership. We don't want to get ourselves involved in a bunch of different partnerships, but I think that's really what I kind of am seeing this year, and historically for the last couple of years that I've talked to people about it, that's really the biggest concern is, am I going to be AM or PM, because I need to figure out child care. It's not going to help for this year, but just for consideration in the future.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Leslie. It's kindergarten that we spend sort of the most time and attention in terms of making those placements. We get a good number of first graders traditionally.
Yeah.
And this year, I think Jonathan Hoffman, our data person, was pointing out, I think we have like 9 new 4th graders coming in. So again, it's just
Interesting.
It's not a predictable. I mean, it's becoming more predictable. It's helpful to think about in terms of placement. Central has 3 sections at each grade level. Ames has 3 sections at each grade level. Blythe sort of moving up at 2, so kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and now 3rd grade, and then Hollywood having 1 section. So sort of that 9 sections across the district, 3-3, 2-1, certainly makes sense as we start to plan our staffing and everything else related to that. So. But right now, kindergarten enrollment, if we sort of evenly spread the averages across, I think we'd be at sort of the 15 to 16 students in a class. I'm hesitant to say that number out loud because I don't think that's where it's going to stay. I think we're going to have more enrollments over the course of the summer yet. So, but I appreciate the feedback. I think it's an ongoing, unique feature of Riverside School District 96, and I think as we can continue to make it more predictable, improve our communications to parents so that they understand it, I think that's improving. You know, I know we had even years ago talked to the realtor groups, like, you know, you can't say that this is an Ames house. You know, you have to say that this is a District 96 house, and, you know, your student assignment will come up, you know, through the school district. But that's, as we all know, that's sometimes a hard thing to hear, too.
Well, that's something that's beyond our control, but we can certainly, you know, it needs to be understood too, that you have to be honest when you come in to do your due diligence in learning about what is the community that you're entering.
Yeah.
And making assumptions or making promises when one doesn't have control over that is problematic at best.
And we put some FAQs up on our website, and we put them in the lobby of the district office, and we've tried to, you know, really build that communication. So,
I think the flurry of emails is exactly why we were more dedicated in studying this and figuring out what the right outcome would be in the future. Do we offer full day daycare or not? Because we got some feedback in the strategic plan too, right? Like, stop studying it, just do it. But we never really studied it because we couldn't do it, and so now we maybe can do it. So we got to study whether we should do it, and so I know that's frustrating to people, but it's just going to take time to work through the process.
right, and just sort of to just add a few comments related to that, as we know, looking at full-day kindergarten, which is what you're talking about, Wesley, is an analysis of student needs and student learning, really,
Right.
first and foremost, but it's also a financial and a facilities-related conversation. And as we sit here at Ames, you know, we've done some significant construction. I will also tell you, during the pandemic, we kind of moved into every inch of our space that we could move into, and we are not out of the pandemic. Children will still need to be socially distanced up to, you know, to some point, 3 feet, maybe less as they become vaccinated over time. But we're really using all our space, and I think there are other challenges that we'll analyze as we move toward, you know, I think we'll do an analysis and, you know, sort of a year-long analysis of looking at all those component parts. There are possibly some things we could sort of move around or squeeze in a little more. I'm so hesitant to suggest those ideas, because it's things like, is our LADSI class something that we should stay at Central, or could it move somewhere else, or is it time for a different district to take turns? And I'm saying that, and I'm saying I'm not saying that, because those are District 96 children in that class, almost all. And they have a really nice home right now at Central School, and I would be very hesitant to make any modifications to that.
Especially if they're ours.
Yeah, so there are not quick and easy solutions, even though we did some great construction work. I think people think, well, you must be sitting on a couple empty rooms, and we're not. You know, we're just not. So, as you know, we created a lot of the ancillary learning spaces too, some of the less than full-size classrooms, so that we could accommodate our social workers and psychologists and our EL teachers and some of the other people that were either working in the hallway or just, you know, didn't have kind of that regular space. So it's great work, but we did not overbuild, you know, based on our enrollment and our current pandemic needs right now too. So
Yeah, it's not as easy as just do it.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
no.
I wish it was. So I'm going to share a little bit later on. We're going to talk a little bit about our ESSERS funding and a safe reopening plan. So there's a little more detail further on down the agenda, but. Just want to share for people that are listening, yes, it is our plan to fully reopen. As the board knows, and I know we're going to talk about this remote learning policy later too, the State Board of Ed, Illinois State Board of Education, has come out loud and clear that through resolution they want all children to return to full in-person learning next school year. They are really dissuading or discouraging school districts or disallowing even school districts from having a remote option. So we're going to talk about a little bit of flexibility that might be within that possibility. But again, the Illinois State Board of Ed is making that clear resolution in an effort to really support school districts to do what we need to do to support families to come back to school. That the sense is that it has not been beneficial for children to be remote and to not be in-person schooling. So it is our intention to fully reopen. It's our intention to have lunch at school. I again want to thank families that I'm not even sure how that happened in the spring, that as many families were able to take their children home for lunch. Certainly families can take their children home for lunch. I've had a few parents reach out and say if I would prefer to do that, could I do that? They certainly could, but it will not be quite the arm twist that we had this spring with that. So we'll be looking at that. I know that's kind of a important topic right now to our principals as they're looking around, and multipurpose room, maybe the library, maybe the gymnasium. You know, we still think we're gonna have to spread children out because it will be that maskless time of the day for them to eat. So right now they're still saying 6 feet apart, right, Pam, with facing in the same direction. They haven't changed that guidance. There's kind of a question. I know last summer Pam and I think tuned in regularly to every Illinois Department of Public Health webinar, information session, et cetera, and things changed over the course of the summer. Part of me thinks things will change still here from June to July to August. But we just don't know. There's still some things we just don't know. But
Martha,
we are.
Can I ask a quick question about the
Yeah.
lunch? Remember how we had an extended amount of time?
Yeah.
Are you anticipating that being the recess connected to that, or is everyone going to keep this extended time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We are not going to extend it to the extent that we extended it this school
Right,
year.
because it was pretty long, yeah.
Yeah, and that was, you know, at that time, that was our whole shift, clean the
Yeah.
rooms and bring in another group of children, and then it was, let's leave that schedule relatively intact as we brought more children back in April. But we have a 50-minute lunch, and I've said to the principals, maybe we could go to 60, you know, if they needed to run sort of 3 groups of 20. This gets into the logistics of how principals organize the day. But we know that we lost some instructional time by doing that extended lunch. So we really don't want to do that again. Maybe we'll eke out a few extra minutes, but not more than 60.
So you're not adding, remember it used to be recess attached to lunch? Is that recess thing going to be?
There'll still be recess attached to lunch, so there'll
So
still
it'll
be.
just take a rotation, they'll eat.
Right.
And then it'll just be a matter of the space getting rotated because of the
Right,
6 feet.
so the way you will eat for 25 and play for
And then you'll go,
25,
right.
or you'll
Just depending on which.
20,
group you are.
20, 20, or,
Okay.
you know, so, yeah. Those are all the things that we're looking
Okay.
at. Other questions about that? We'll talk a little about some other just supports that'll be in place and how we're looking at spending some of our Esther's money. The other thing I just wanted to share, I know some of you were talking as you came in, our construction has started. Ramesh and Jim will be giving us more detailed updates at future board meetings, but as Ramesh and Neera pointed out, we just started on Monday, I guess, with our construction. I think the parking lot is all torn up and some large conduit is in at Hollywood School. And the central sprinkler project, we've cleared everything out and we're getting going. As you know, we're working on a very tight time frame for all of this. So not a lot of specifics, but here we go again with the summer of construction at 2 of our schools. So that is the superintendent's report for tonight.
All right. Thank you, Martha. All right, next on the agenda is the consent agenda. So can the board secretary review tonight's consent agenda?
Tonight's consent agenda consists of meetings of previous minutes for May 4th, 2021 closed session, May 4th biennial organizational meeting, May 19th, 2021 minutes of closed session, May 19th, 2021 minutes of regular business meeting, the personnel report as presented, payables pre-list as of May 28, 2021, payables pre-list as of June 16th, 2021, and the West 40 Regional Safe Schools contract for the 2021 to 22 school year.
Is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Kathy, can you call the roll?
Ms. Dunn?
Aye.
Ms. Piper?
Aye.
Mr. Murhol?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Muirhead?
Aye.
And Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, next item is the Riverside Education Council. No? Okay. And are there any board member comments?
I was just going to quickly comment. I had an opportunity to participate in Hauser's graduation earlier this month, and you know, I'm in higher ed, so I'm a staff for graduations, and but I felt very honored to be a part of that. I did not realize I would have the privilege of handing out, you know, the diplomas to all of the graduates, but I just really want to commend everybody who put that great event on. It was a really beautiful ceremony. I know the principal and all her staff really did a lot of work to put that together, and it was just, it was hard to put into words, just the feeling that day after the year that these students have had and you know, the educators and everything, so I was really glad to be a part of it.
I was at the same ceremony, and I want to first give personal thanks to Stephanie for telling me when and where to stand. I think the first couple pictures I was photobombing with across. My apologies for that. But yes, I agree. It was a great ceremony, very wonderful day. It's been such a tremendous a year of flexibility, of unpredictability, and a lot of folks putting in a lot of extra efforts to get us to that day. And you know, I for one am proud of the district. I'm proud of the board. I'm proud of all the staff and employees who got us to that day. I think we shone pretty brightly this past year, and I definitely appreciate everyone's work to get us to that day.
And big thanks on that one go to April May and Chris Harvalos for putting that together. I also understand the two school secretaries, Deb Quillis and Danny Ellis over there, just, I don't know how they did it. I mean, I showed up at the stadium at the time they told me to show up, but it was lovely, and it was, you know, a raised stage and flowers and a balloon arch for pictures, and the graduates looking great. And I will also tell you is the eighth graders, they did take their mask down to get their diploma and get a picture. They were outside, and that felt like, you know, most of them are also vaccinated. So there were eighth grade teachers behind me saying, I've never seen his face before. I've never seen her face before. So
Oh, my.
I think it was a profound moment on many, many levels. So thank you to Dan and Stephanie for participating in that.
All right. Any other comments? All right. If not, that will bring us to committee reports. First up is the Policy Committee.
Yeah, I don't have anything new for the Policy Committee. Much of what we have been discussing is up later on tonight's agenda under old business, the remote education program policy. So nothing new has come our way. I think just a lot of thought has been being put into that over the last couple weeks.
All right. Then next is the Facilities Committee.
Martha summarized what's going on right now, and we will continue later. I don't think we do not have any currently scheduled meetings, and there will be an old business item coming up. That's it.
All right. Education Committee.
Yeah, I believe we are meeting on the 21st, this Monday, Linda, myself, and Angela, and Martha. And as you probably saw the last meeting, we're continuing our strategic plan kind of itemization and thinking about, of course, next year, how are we addressing any gaps, any staff that need to be either hired or moved around, or how are we going to address the needs. And I also think it's an interesting conversation to talk about the psychological needs of the students and how we continue to evaluate them and what their needs might be after a challenging year. So definitely there's going to be a huge kind of thinking about their well-being in general when we come back. So I'm excited to hear about that.
All right. The Personnel Committee.
I have nothing new to report out tonight.
All right. And finally, the Finance Committee.
Jim Fission's going to go over the budget, get that a little bit later in the agenda for the proposed 2022 budget.
All right. Got to get all those twos in there.
Yeah.
All right. Then next item on the agenda then is old business. The first item under old business is the presentation of the 2020-2021 legal budget and adoption resolution. Is there a motion that the board approve the 2020-2021 legal budget and adoption of the resolution as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Jim, was there anything additional to?
I was just going to go over what I went over last time if you want me to, but the exciting part's not the new budget.
Yeah? Okay, it's exciting. You set a high bar here early. All right. So any further discussion? No? Okay. Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay, Ms. Piper,
Aye.
Mr. Marhold,
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi,
Aye.
Mr. Merhead,
Aye.
Ms. Gunn,
Aye.
Mr. Flynn.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, next is the strategic plan. Is there a motion that the Board of Education approve the 5-year strategic plan as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? I'll say one thing as one who participated in preparing the strategic plan. I definitely, and we've said it before, but I want to say it again. Our great thanks to the members of the staff and the members of the community who participated in compiling this strategic plan. It was a lot of work on everyone's part. I think the results that we've come out with are head and shoulders above our last strategic plan that we had 5 years ago. It definitely worked well for its time, but I'm anticipating great things to come from the new strategic plan, and I look forward to working with it and working with the administration as we implement it over the next 5 years. All right, is there any further discussion? All right, Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay, Mr. Marvel?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Merrick?
Aye.
Ms. Gunn?
Aye.
Ms. Tyson?
Aye.
Mr. Hudson?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, next item is the IASB Board self-evaluation on August 4th. Is there anything to note on that? There's
That's
no
just a
motion.
confirmation of the date. You know, we had looked to see if a Saturday might work, and it just didn't work in people's schedules, so I just wanted to be clear that we're confirming the August 4th date.
Everybody free?
Yep.
Everybody's free. I'm
All
free.
right. Maybe we'll start out with something crazy like sodas, Dr. Pepper, to get everybody nice.
Caffeinated and.
Nice
Get all
and
jacked up on that one.
Dan, then it's Jolt and M&M's.
Jolt.
There you go.
Hey, you say Skittles, I'm in on it.
We can arrange that too.
All right, that sounds good. All right. Next then, we have the remote educational program.
Hey, can we?
I'm sorry?
The contract.
The
The star
contract with
contract,
Star.
M3.
Yeah.
Oh, did I miss something?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry.
The
we'll go
one
back
thing
then, the
Ramesh is
STAR
watching.
contract.
Right, he's gonna get nervous.
Sorry, Ramesh.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Skittles.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Is there a motion that the board approve the Vistara contract extension as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on this item?
This enables us to continue working with Ramesh as our owner's representative. He's done an excellent job in keeping tabs on our various contractors and our professional service providers, and we legitimately would like to continue engaging his services.
So, hey, Joel, the only question I had on this one was Exhibit A. Is that just stating the current projects, not limited to those projects? This is more of an ongoing contract for what we need him for, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought.
One thing that Ramesh has shared is that if you don't have a capital improvement plan, you may not need me, but I think as we, we,
I don't think that's going to happen.
right. Not in the short term.
Not in the short term.
No, I think having the project manager is one of the best things we ever did.
Yeah.
Just keeping an eye on the,
Yeah.
the constant budget changes or the extra add-ons that sometimes happen, and just keeping a mindset of that is, because we can't be there and our administration can't always be there. And I think he's been a great communicator and done a great job, so,
It's also valuable to have someone who is an owner's rep,
yeah.
who can look after, who is not the owner but is acting on behalf of the owner, much like we have our legal counsel.
Yeah, exactly. It's to have an advocate in a different way, so.
Yeah, I know a couple of people that work as project managers in a civil capacity. I've just over the years talked to people that wished they'd hired one because they're like, oh, we can do this, and then you realize how much goes involved. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I think it's worth it.
Sherry, I don't know if you have experience. I seem to recall that there was a time a previous board had hired Ramesh and then
Yeah.
he was not
They
around
were-
for a while and then was brought back.
No, because we weren't doing any facilities work, but he was so well-liked the last time, and to have someone that understood our buildings as they existed prior was a big bonus, because we didn't have to educate or have that person learn our places and our people was great. So that was my understanding as far as what happened.
think that's correct, and I
Yeah.
think this is a brief moment to shout out to Rich Regan, who actually
Yeah,
helped
yeah.
re-engage him.
Right.
And then I know Jim and I had an opportunity to meet him, and right away we were like, well, we can see why everybody.
Yeah,
loved
everybody
working
loved,
with him.
everybody loved
Yeah.
working with him.
Yeah, and just
Right.
very knowledgeable and
Yeah.
pleasure to work with.
All right. Any further discussion? All right, Kathy, can you call the roll?
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Meredith?
Aye.
Ms. Gunn?
Aye.
Ms. Clyburn?
Aye.
Mr. Marhold?
Aye.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, now that takes us to the remote educational program, second reading as an action item. Is there a motion that the board approve the second reading and adoption of policy 6:185 as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and I know we wanted to have some discussion on this.
Yeah, so we've had some informal conversations. I know Stephanie and I talked earlier today. So as you know, we had a fairly detailed overview. Shelley Anderson joined us at our last meeting to give more context and information about this particular policy. I know there were questions even at that time. At that time, the Illinois State Board of Ed resolution was still fairly new. I think the Illinois State Board of Ed has continued to come out in communication and say, no, we are clear. We want children back in school. We believe it is the best way for children to learn, perhaps the only way for children to learn. You also know that we had reached out to our families sort of prior to the Illinois State Board of Ed resolution, just wondering if there were families that would still need a remote education due to either a health concern in the child or a health concern in the family. We heard from 12 families that they would prefer that option. What I think, as we try to think moving forward, it's very possible that families thought that they were potentially asking for something like they had this year, thinking that we would still have a remote academy in place. If we adopted the remote learning policy, we might consider that. Considering that for what might be 12 students, maybe not even 12 students, as sort of circumstances change, and I guess I mean optimistically change for the better, and families may feel even more comfortable returning to school in the future. It certainly isn't that 20 to 30% of our student body where it starts to make sense, where personnel are dedicated to, really we formed actual classrooms, as you know, of children that were all remote, that we really wanted to create classroom communities, whether they were virtual or in person, and I think that's something that we were successful in doing. With such a small number, that becomes a very different consideration. So one thing that has evolved is West 40, our regional office of education, has looked at this idea of setting up essentially a virtual program for children that really would need it. Interesting, I think it's really important to point out that the board does not have to approve the remote learning policy to allow children to participate in the program through West 40. So again, just to kind of give a thumbnail sketch, and this is all still evolving. I talked to the executive director from West 40 just earlier today to kind of make sure that I was clear on where the program was or wasn't. The program right now would be the West 40 program, this virtual learning opportunity, be available for students in grades 4 through 8. He said in an exception, maybe they could take in a third grade student, and we have a third grade student on our list. It's what is called ALOP, A-L-O-P. It's Alternative Learning Opportunity Program. It's actually identified in the school code as an option separate from what is considered remote learning, just to keep everything really confusing. ALOP was essentially originally identified or used for truant students, was probably the most common use. Students that just were struggling to come to a traditional school setting and needed a lot of outreach in both sort of social, emotional, as well as academic support. So again, it's really using that ALOP kind of almost carve out of the school code to create a program for students. There would still be some kind of individualized assessment for children for it to be determined that a child would need that level of virtual schooling. You know, our first goal would be to assess a child and is there something more we could do in terms of supports to bring a child back to school. But if not, and if we chose to participate, each child would have their own student success plan. Essentially, think of it almost like an IEP, but not because of disability, but because of remote learning needs. Again, these are children that maybe either just really thrived with remote education for one reason or another, or just the health concerns more likely within the home than within the child are really preventing a child from being safe to come to school. The reason I kind of carve out then the other exception is, you know, that we talked about last time, that we have a home hospital policy and a way to create programs for children that have significant medical concerns and are unable to come to school. For those reasons, those children essentially get what I would call kind of an in-home tutoring program, and that's a program that's always been in place in our school district and really in all school districts. It's legislated to be that way. So historically, it's been more, I think, of the child who has mono, or the child who has enough of an orthopedic injury, has maybe had orthopedic surgery or something, and really just cannot physically get to school, and yet they're ready to learn. Sometimes it's a child going through cancer treatment or something. So again, that opportunity, that option still exists for us to consider home hospital. West 40 presents this option of an ALOP program for grades 4 through 8 or grades 3 through 8. There would be a fee associated with that. They're anticipating it might be about $10,000 per student to send them to the West 40 virtual, what would essentially be the West 40 virtual school. It's hard for them to even have a lot more details around how to staff it, et cetera, because they don't know how many children might be interested in this program. So we're gonna kind of be working with them in an ongoing way. And then there's this possibility of the policy. So again, sort of a variety of options in terms of how we look to serve our entire student body, and certainly encompass the families that have reached out to us and said that they may likely need some kind of additional support for their child to return to school next year, and that may need to be virtual or remote schooling. So kind of a long-winded way of bringing whether or not to adopt this particular policy. My sense is, in talking to other superintendents, that many districts are choosing to not adopt this policy, that they feel that it's perhaps counter, particularly for elementary school districts, counter to what the Illinois State Board of Ed is really urging us to do through resolution, and that given that we have these other options of home hospital or maybe the West 40 ALOP program, that we begin to see a path to serve children that may need service in a different kind of way.
And Martha, that was actually where I was going, and to include Stephanie in on this. If ALOP is available to us through different means of policy, then what is the benefit to the district for saying yes to the remote educational program? Because I'm not hearing.
Yeah, I think it's a great
lot.
question, and Stephanie, I don't know if you'd rather answer or you want me to answer.
You can take a stab.
Yeah.
Happy to supplement.
Yeah, I would say I don't know that I see the advantage. Again, what I'm hearing, and my sense is even just listening carefully to our attorney, listening carefully to other superintendents, listening carefully to the other options that are out there, considering the very small number of students that may or may not need this kind of support. I worry that the policy may almost push us in an area or put us in an area that's counter to what we're intending to do, right? I think we were just talking about, I used the second graders anecdote about the best part of the year is when we got to come to school. And we know, in particular our youngest children, we know that as much as we did a really good job with remote learning, it is not the better way to educate children. And so yeah, I think if you were wanting my recommendation, I would not recommend that we adopt the remote learning policy.
So I think you just answered this, but these two are mutually exclusive. We do not need a remote policy to join West 40. West 40 is a completely independent thing that a family would participate in, or a student would participate in.
Correct, and I double-checked that with West 40 again today, and I've double-checked that legally, because I agree, it's like, do we have to have that to participate? They are separate.
Okay, because it felt like they should be attached, but they're,
Yeah.
one is our thing and one is their
Yeah.
thing, and we
Yeah.
participate in their thing, but it's not
Yeah.
our thing. Okay.
And ALOP is a thing under the school code, and remote
Yeah.
learning is a thing,
Yeah.
so to speak, yeah.
And so this is only 4th grade and up for the West 40 thing, so do we have any idea how many of those families were K through 3 that would be
Yeah.
able to participate? And
Yeah,
does
I
that make
do.
that number even lower, I guess is where I'm thinking?
Yeah, we have 2 first graders and 3 second graders, and then I mentioned there's a 3rd grader, actually that's a family that had reached out to us and said upon second thought they were going to come back to in person. And again, what's hard about this is at the time we were asking, it was sort of a initial inquiry, families didn't know.
Right.
You know, I think families were thinking, sure, we'd do that again, what you had this year, a District 96 teacher with a group of District 96
Yeah.
students, and that's really not what it's going to be. So I think as I have an opportunity, again, depending on what goes on with our policy adoption here or not, but, you know, it would be my goal to reach out individually to each of these families to help, you know, just sort of, probably a conversation, maybe it starts with a letter, but it's a conversation to say, let me help you understand sort of what the options are, and again, with, you know, what can we do if a child is just, it's been hard, they've been at home for a long time and they're worried about coming back to school. Is it social emotional supports that we could provide? Are they worried that their child has fallen behind? Are there academic supports that we could provide? So, you know, I think as we always are, we're very ready to, you know, individualize our approach to make sure that children can be successful coming back to school here as our first choice.
So I do have a question, and this might, I know school boards, like, they're trying to push us away from remote. I guess I do have a question, just sort of like the screening that we've been doing. I'm assuming that screening, I mean, I know that no decision's been made, but I'm assuming we're going to be doing similar screening, especially for the grade school, for like COVID and what have you, like doing the Raptor.
Yeah.
How is that going to play in if a kid does come down with COVID, asymptomatic, or like their siblings? I mean, how are we going to, are they going to, do we still have an option to do remote for them
Yeah.
the way we used to?
The resolution.
Yes, so thank you, and thank you for pointing that out. So there is a specific carve-out in that Illinois State Board of Ed resolution that says children under quarantine, specific COVID quarantine, who are not eligible for vaccination should receive remote instruction for that period of time. So, you know, what you'd hope is that children who, you know, have had COVID or been exposed to COVID, it's a 10-day quarantine. Hopefully it's not any kind of extended illness beyond that. But that we would then, as a school district, have a plan. And our plan, we're looking at our options there. One is that it becomes kind of back to our more traditional way of some opportunities to check in with a student. We've even talked about like our permanent substitute, maybe being the one that would check in with students during the time when their class is off at art, music, and PE, and then provide some homework, support, check-in time, what sort of gets referred to as like office hours. If you got any questions about your math, you have questions about your reading, how can I help you? The other idea is, could we open our classrooms again through sort of a Zoom link for a child or 2 or 3 that might be on quarantine. I'm, you know, knock on wood, hoping and anticipating that the number of children out on quarantine who are also not eligible to be vaccinated will be a small number. You know, we do know, in talking with other school districts, and we know that there was probably even a moment here, I think maybe it was post-Halloween or something, where we had lots of children out on quarantine.
Right.
So, you know, could we end up in a situation where there's 30, 40 children out on quarantine? It could happen. So that's a conversation we're sort of, you know, toe in the water with our staff. We know how to do that. It's very different when it's set up. Your room no longer is set up to sort of be running in that concurrent way with if I bring in some children
Right.
on Zoom. So something we still have to sort out,
Right,
whether it would
right.
be kind of that direct access or some kind of academic support along the way.
But I guess my question was, we still have that option to do something for those kids.
Right, and not only is it an option, I would say we have that requirement.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So Martha, one of the other scenarios that we also talked about linked to that, Dave, is, you know, let's say the vaccines do become available for the population of children under the age of 12, so they're technically eligible, there's the and provision, but for whatever reason, the child has not yet been vaccinated and is then quarantined. You know, kind of under that scenario, would we have leeway to still provide them? We would not be required under the resolution to provide them with virtual or remote education during the time of their quarantine in that scenario, but could we still explore? I think we discussed like maybe, you know, they weren't the first to get the vaccine and their child hasn't been able to get a spot or what have you.
Yeah.
If the rollout is anything like it was for the adult population.
Yeah, not exactly equitable or.
Yeah, so
under-
would
yeah.
we still have some leeway for those scenarios?
And I think, you know, when I start to think, it was like anytime we've had a child out for some extended absence where it's not long enough, even just a bad case of the flu or, you know, relatively minor surgery, but they need to miss 5 days of school or something, you know, I think our teachers are accustomed to that kind of outreach to students and support them. I mean, it's in certainly the child's best interest. I know teachers are very committed to making sure children stay caught up, that idea. And again, I see the quarantine period as hopefully short, kind of maximum 10 days. And so, yeah, I see us as doing outreach. I think we still have to explore. As we know, there were some teachers that were really comfortable, like, sure, I'll put a Chromebook on their desk and, stand closer to the Chromebook and make sure that they can hear me. And there's other teachers where that was really challenging in their classrooms. And again, I think regardless, I think all teachers feel very comfortable with sort of gathering up work, having a check-in. Again, are looking at within our own school staff as to what are those options, who else might be available for a check-in so that children have a bit more synchronous time and a bit more connection over the course of the school day when they're in quarantine. So yeah, all good. I think key points. The quarantine students will get support. A child who has significant illness and needs home hospital, we have a way to give them support. A family grades 3, 4, and up who really, really wanted and needed a virtual program, there becomes an opportunity for them. So.
All right. Well, we have a recommendation that we not adopt this resolution. I'm wondering, what is our best way to handle this? Would we like to vote on it, or would we like to just continue on with the rest of the agenda?
I think we usually follow the superintendent's recommendation, but
So I think
as
the
far as
idea of like you would
actionable, I
vote
don't know.
and potentially vote no. I mean, it's up
Right,
to you.
yeah.
You
I
vote,
think
but
so.
Right,
you
do we
would-
need to
as a
actually
motion,
vote
you would-
We need to vote. I thought we-
actionably,
yeah,
you know?
we need to
Yeah,
vote.
Then
I think we,
we can go ahead with a formal vote if
the
that's
the
required.
formal recommendation, putting words in the superintendent's
Yeah.
mouth, is to vote no on
Yes.
this.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and that will close this issue
Right.
for now.
And Stephanie, as policy chair, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, no, we had those
Yeah.
discussions
Yeah.
beforehand. I'm just not sure if you have to move to like approve, or you have to move
Yeah.
to not move forward with it.
Kathy and I
or
looked a little
remain,
bit at
or-
protocol earlier today, and we felt that because there's a motion to
Right.
adopt the policy, that then it would be vote no.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And that, I think that would also then reflect for the record that we really gave this very careful consideration. I think that's important too,
Yes.
that this is not something that the board took lightly, and I think by representing it that way in the records is valuable.
Okay. All right, let's see, so Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay. Mr. Muirhead?
Nay.
Ms. Gunn?
Nay.
Ms. Gleiber?
No.
Mr. Marhold?
No.
Mr. Garside?
Nay.
Mr. Hunt?
No.
Motion fails.
Okay, then the next item is new business discussion. We have the tentative fiscal 2022 budget. I have it on high authority that it is exciting.
Well, of course it is.
Well, it's balanced, so
It's
that-
balanced.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
exciting, that is exciting.
Okay.
So this next budget starts July 1st, 2021, in a couple weeks, and goes for a year, and it ends up next June 30th.
Oops. So here's the timeline. We have a notice going in the paper by June 22nd so that people know if they want to come to the hearing we have next month and make a comment that we'll be having the hearing at the beginning of the July meeting. And so we'll have the hearing, and then we'll adopt it later with old business. And then after that, I've got some requirements of where I need to file it within 30 days of adoption. We have to make some assumptions when we put together a budget, and I'm generally pretty conservative. So with the property taxes, held it actually match. It's 0.5% higher than last year, or than the current year that's just ending. So when I looked at what's actually come in through May, and that means we still have a couple weeks that more could come in, but only 0.5% higher than that. And normally I would budget 2% higher, but we still want to allow that property taxes may be paid late and be slow coming in. So even though it didn't happen this year, we'll be safe. Maybe it's taking a little time. Eventually, most of the tax money comes in, but it may cause a little cash flow problem if taxes get paid late. So conservative on that side. And for expenditures, we're still negotiating the 2 contracts. So I just kept what I always have in for projections. So in February, when we looked at 10-year projections, I used 3% for salaries. And so I didn't have a reason to change that. I just kept that the same. So the blue numbers in the middle that hopefully you can see them, but they're on the report in front of you. Our revenues will be $1.1 million higher. Our operating revenues will be $1.1 million higher than our expenditures. And that gives us money out of operating basically to pay our last payment on those debt certificates from 2011. So those will be all paid off by this time next year. And then on the column with the red in it, that's the transfers. We're going to move enough to make the last payment on the debt certificates, and if it works out right, we'll end up with 0 in that account, and we won't worry about it again until we have some other debt to pay off.
That is exciting.
We might have to have a party then. And the other is the transfer to cover the new projects that Vistara is managing for us that will come out of capital projects. It's Fund 60. So the top parts are operating, and the bottom 2, we kind of segregate those because they're not part of the annual operations, the debt and capital projects. One of the big drivers in the expenditures is the number of people that we hire, because salaries and benefits are a big part of our budget, big part of what we do. What we've done here, what I wanted to show here is that we've added a net 4 full-time equivalent employees. And the breakout on the right, there's some pluses and minuses to get to that 4. We've held our FTE pretty steady the last 4 years, 249, 246, 247, 247. And now we're going up to 251, almost 252. But that's the full-time subs that we added, and adding another section of 3rd grade at Blythe Park. So that's mostly where the FTE have come from. Any questions?
Jim, how will you integrate the ESSERs?
So there's,
I guess we haven't even, as a district, decided what allocations are going to be made, so do you have a timeline for those things with Martha?
we added a couple positions that were math interventionists,
Okay.
and I think the EL. So out of that $1.3 million that we have 3 years to spend, I put, well, enough to cover them, about $350,000 in there. So then we have to be thinking about another 500 and another 500 after that.
Okay.
Yeah, that 5.5, that plus 5.5 we approved, I think it was the last regular board meeting, maybe? That was
Yeah.
pegged, I mean, we're pegging that for the ESSERs, or at least that was the discussion that we had
Yeah.
around, like, we at
Yeah.
least have a short term to pay for it, and we'll have
Right.
to reassess
I know.
if we still need it in a couple of years.
Right, and I didn't know if those numbers would change as far as staff recommendations for FTEs, or if, over the summer, if we're going to, I guess we have to look at enrollment too, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the one thing we were clear about is we were already looking at math data, right? And as we've even just looked at our own MTSS process, math intervention has been something that I think Angela's talked to, like, you know, we have a certain number of reading specialists that support children with reading difficulties and a certain number of math interventionists that support children with math challenges, and that number is, doesn't have to be exactly equal, but there's been kind of a disparity there, and then we're looking at math as perhaps the area students have struggled more, particularly as we come out of the pandemic. So the additional math interventions seem to make sense, kind of like right off the bat. And,
Yeah, no, I agree with that, for
subs is
sure.
something else that we had, we had really added those in this past year. And again, continuing to look at, in anticipation of staff absences, hopefully not a lot of them, but it was just a way to kind of build some continuity in the school and in classrooms by doing that. I mentioned they may be the ones that help us with students on quarantine. So again, there's things that are tied to ESSERS. They are things that we may look at over the next, 1, 2, 3 years and say, these are things that make sense for the smooth operation of the school districts and supporting children even beyond ESSERS. And that's a decision that we'll, kind of continue to have along the way.
But I think if I heard you right, like, as school starts, we might need another math.
Yeah, that's my
intervention or
question was
something,
more
so
about like
it's-
over the summer and continuing on, or will we be revisiting this for FTE talks? And I'm sure,
Yeah.
right, depends on, of course, the students that we have and.
Yeah, I know probably last August, right, I think one of our requests to the Board of Education from the administration was just sort of, please grant us some flexibility as we try to put, staffing plans together in a really unique school year. And I'm anticipating this one feels a bit more predictable. We also had added a 6th nurse. We had 1 nurse at each building, but we added a 6th. And I know, Pam will continue to evaluate that, just again, the demand on nurses from COVID precautions and, contact tracing and support and a lot of communication to families. So we don't know, could that be one where we come back and say, we'd like to bring in an agency nurse or something on a part-time basis. So yeah, I think that if I'm understanding the question correctly, we'll continue to bring it forward as things are presented to us, and we're trying to make sort of the best possible predictions in terms of what we anticipate.
Yeah, I know you
schools
can't, you don't have a
Yeah.
crystal ball. I was just wondering if you had any
Yeah.
other additions that we hadn't heard of last time.
On the personnel report, you approved 2 new social workers. They are not 2 additional social workers. They are social workers filling vacancies.
Right.
Really enjoyed getting to know both of them in the interview process. They're both social workers that started out as teachers and
Good.
became social workers, and I think have just a strong sense of, really this idea that's out there is that all children have experienced trauma because of the pandemic on some level. And so how do we support all children coming back to school? And so mental health is another area I think we'll be keeping a close eye on if we would need some additional supports. But I think we're putting together a really strong team, sort of our current number of employees.
Well, not even support for students, but potentially support for staff
Staff,
and like how
yeah.
to identify or how to support or it's a big unknown. That-
Yeah.
It would even be nice to give families a place that they could
Yeah.
reach out if they had questions.
Yeah.
Would be a nice thing too. I mean, if I had a wish list.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll see, right? I mean, is the conversation we were just having about like remote students, this idea of coming back and doing something that was so normal for a while, and then, the being at home with a mask on and doing school virtually, or not a mask on, maybe in your own home, but you know what I mean? Like this idea of not coming out into a social setting. Children will have challenges with that.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, Jim, I think in the past it's been mentioned that, over the previous school year, there was some maintenance that got deferred, and then we talked about that we're going to be re-engaging it now. So I'm assuming some of that re-engagement is coming out of this budget we're talking here, or?
Right, so there's gonna be some underspending when we're about to close down, and some of that will roll into capital projects, but we are gonna try to plan more on the maintenance. It's hard to work around the big construction project last year. We kind of had DLA redo our 10-year plan, and it's more summary, but so that I ballpark have $1.2 million in each year. When I did the projections, we had 1.1, and another sprinkler comes up, or it won't be sprinklers because we'll.
Oh, I hope not.
Yeah.
Don't say that.
So we were able to budget a little more in each of those and project higher amounts. So we'll keep working on those projects too.
But the budget is in balance, so we're able to transfer funds, or how is that we're in balance if we're having a?
What I've been doing is transferring funds into 60 for all the projects that Vistera is managing, because they're generally the bigger projects. And out of maintenance, repair, it's really repair and preventative maintenance. And I pay that out of 20, which, cut out of the buildings and grounds budget.
Okay.
I don't know if I missed it, missed it in here, and maybe this is just part of the levy process, but like, what is the percentage of where we get our revenue from? Because I know the majority of it is local, and then part of it is state, part of it is federal. Like, just roughly, what?
It's probably written in one of the paragraphs there, but the property tax revenue is gotta be 85% of,
That's what I was thinking. Okay.
yeah. And then there's a little bit of extra local money, but mostly it's, then state and federal make up that other 15%.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's, I just hold those even. I don't expect them to go up, and I hope they don't go down, but they're not a big factor. Predicting that property tax is going to have the biggest influence.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I've got lots of spreadsheets on that if you want to look at.
I'm sure you do.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. It was exciting as advertised. All right. We talked a little bit about ESSERs. We have another line item. Are we going to?
Yeah, so I just have information to share. School districts are asked to create a plan and to share it publicly. So here you see an overview. Essentially, it's a template is required in terms of the areas that we will address. And Sherry, this is kind of, I think, to your question, that we will be looking at academic supports for students, we'll be looking at social emotional supports for students, just ongoing health and safety resources overall, and other capital improvements. So I know we did go ahead and buy, they're not really capital, but we did buy air purifiers for all the classrooms after a lot of sort of debate and analysis in terms of trying to best understand the research about that. It's something that we did in the spring. At the same time, we were probably opening more windows and using the outdoors more too. But again, I think staff were very appreciative of that. As you know, we put the tents in. That was, again, money that we spent last year, but we'll continue to use the tents to have the outdoor learning spaces. And just making sure that, again, our buildings are as clean as possible, as safe as possible, that windows where we have operable windows are functional. As you know, we decided to put the extra money in the Hollywood project so that the windows in the multipurpose room would be operable windows. So again, just those key and core areas, and really, again, we're addressing all of them and have different expenditures dedicated to all of those different areas.
Yeah, this is a good summary, Martha. The check boxes and
Actually, you know what, and let me just, you'll see the one box that I don't have checked. If you look very carefully, there's a faint question mark, and is the implementation of on-site COVID screening and diagnostic testing. And I think, David, this is maybe part of what you were asking about. So it is likely that the District 102 lab will close. And the University of Illinois, as you know, was a consideration. They kind of weren't ready to be up and running at quite the same level that the District 102 lab was. And so now it looks like districts are more carefully considering this, what they call the SHIELD program. It's the University of Illinois. I've been to just one informational session. I said I'd be interested in learning more about it. Interesting question if we would want to continue to saliva screen. I mean, that's really what it is. The other thing is, after a lot of sort of anticipation, we are now finally at a place where we can purchase the Bionex quick tests. I know they're now, I think, being advertised on TV and available maybe at Costco and local pharmacies too, but the idea that school districts would essentially hang on to a supply of those to be able to do quick diagnostic testing. The saliva screening, they really talk about sort of three different options. One is to sort of engage in kind of a comprehensive surveillance level, screening level testing like we have done this past year. But I believe they would just be recommending it for unvaccinated students and staff. So as you know, we were kind of doing it with anybody who was willing to consent and participate. The other idea is that school districts are encouraged to do it where there are high contact sports. As a elementary, middle, we don't really have high contact sports. We do have some basketball going on. I suppose we could consider it for our teams. The other idea is that you consider it only during an outbreak. I was just trying, as I say that, I'm like, and how is that helpful? It's you're surveilling everybody else.
Yeah, no, I don't know about.
Yeah.
It's too late at that
Not
point.
that,
That's- what's the
where
point
outbreak
after
has already
that?
occurred. It's that because there's been an outbreak, should you now sort of delve into more specific surveillance?
Okay.
It's a question I have, it's a question, we don't need to decide it tonight, but I think that is of those different health and safety resources as we think about protocols for next year. And even talking to our school nurses, I think they feel uncertain. It is a different time, certainly for the adults, in that most all adults are vaccinated. We know that, it's only 12 and up right now in terms of our schools. My information is as good as yours. It's what we're hearing on, through the news media in terms of when vaccines will become available for younger children. I know we've all at different times sort of talked about, we've heard maybe July, maybe September, maybe sometime after September. Do I anticipate that we'll probably have a time period where children are becoming eligible for vaccines over the course of next year, and maybe not all, maybe it'll roll down to age 9 or age 6, and when we would have a fully vaccinated or close to fully vaccinated student body. It is also, I want to point out, there's been no decision about that being a mandate in schools. I think there's still a lot to sort through. So the idea of having some kind of screening process in place, or diagnostic testing, or both, is certainly still a good question for school districts to be considering. Just something you can all sleep on a little bit. And it's the U of I cost is talking about $10 per test per person. We were paying $11 per test per person. I believe there's some additional setup fees that go along with it. It's interesting, the state is coming out with the financial tiers that if you are a school district that has more financial struggles, that it can be made available to you. It would not be made available to us in terms of our tiered and our current funding level.
The cost really came down. It was $21.
Yeah, I remember
think,
I'd
if
spoken to the rep and it was 20 last
Yeah.
summer
20.
Yeah.
when we had that talk.
Yeah, and I think a
yeah.
lot of things started, I think that was part of when we were talking with them. I just think they were, it felt to me, and I know Sherry, you had talked, like they were just getting the program kind of up and off
Yeah.
the ground. And I think as just programs have built in efficiencies, again, it actually is now cheaper than the 102 lab.
Right.
I know Pam, and Pam participated in it because she was on jury duty, and it's also a process that's been made available to the Illinois court system. You shared that it's a much larger vial and a lot more saliva required. So, as you all know, for some of you that did it at home with your own young children, that was a challenge, right? And it was a very small vial that we use. So again, I need to gather some more information, but I see that as still one of our open-ended questions.
Yeah, I personally would hope that we would continue with something when we don't have vaccinated children under 12. I would like to learn more about the quick test. I don't know if there's any way you could get us information about the efficacy and the reliability, because I haven't read any research yet about that.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone knows about that. But I personally would like to learn more at least, and so we have some information. That'd be nice.
Yeah, I'd be interested in continuing to follow it. I'm not sure I feel as strongly about we should do it right now, but I don't know that I feel like we shouldn't do it either. I'm kind of on the fence with it.
Yeah, I'm
so-
not saying we force everyone, but if
Yeah.
people want to do it, I don't
Yeah.
think it would definitely, I think it would benefit the children for sure, for us to identify as many as we could.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you need to keep in mind, just because you're vaccinated, you're still at risk. The risk is obviously
Right.
significantly reduced, but you're still at risk. And so,
And my understanding of the pieces of the process is that if you were a vaccinated individual that had, you had the stuffy nose or the sore throat, that you could easily take one of those quick tests, with permission, even through the school, would be available to you. And again, that would certainly help us in understanding as best as we can. I think some of the pieces of the science are still imperfect, but again, better than nothing. I think there are still families that would go off and get a COVID test, but it's nice if the school nurse with parent permission could take care of that right in the schools, and that is something that schools are looking at, getting the CLIA waiver. I've been told it's not hard to do. It's essentially an application process, and our nurses are open to that possibility. Those tests, those Bionex tests, have been made available to school districts free. Whether or not that'll change, Pam, I don't know if you're aware. Yeah.
that's good enough.
So we'll gather some more information. I'll do that.
What did you,
everything.
what did you say?
Let's get him now.
Oh, he wants to get him now and get us done out.
How many do you have?
I think you can buy them at Costco. according
You're a
to
good
some
shopper.
commercials.
Yes, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, right,
If it's-
right.
If it's the quick test that they were using in similar rose garden parties that I could think of, that they see.
I would
It's
hope
a
they would
little
have
off.
improved since then, but.
It's the Bionex Now, right? Right, Pam? It's that's the, I think the brand name, or, yeah, that's how it's referred to.
Definitely like to hear on the efficacy on that, on
Right,
the,
right.
Yeah.
how sensitive it is.
Yeah.
All right. Next item is public comment. Is there any public comment?
No, there is not.
Okay, in future meeting dates, July 7th, committee of the whole meeting at 7 PM in
That's-
multipurpose room, and yes, we'll get to that.
Okay,
We have it
sorry.
listed as consider cancellation of this meeting. I've had a whole lot of fun tonight myself. I don't know about
I was
you
thinking we
guys.
meet next week
Wait.
and the next 2 weeks out.
Just to make it every week.
To Dan's point, the fun was provided by Jim.
That's
Yeah.
true, yes. yes.
Jim, right.
Let's see, so I don't know, Martha, do we
You
have
guys are
any?
clearly trying to build our YouTube ratings, right? And viewership.
Hit the
We
like
have
button,
traditionally
subscribe.
taken a respite from as long as I've been on the board. I think there really, until we have a lot more going on, there isn't as much to talk about, realistically speaking. So for me, I'm okay. But I would, of course,
Well, I was
like
going
to hear your
confirm that.
opinions.
Do we
but-
have any pressing matters at the moment?
No, I mean, I think for July regular board, I'd like to be able to bring you more information about the COVID screening. I think we'll have an update on facilities. You have the budget, but you'd be fine with just the July meeting, or you want there to be a July cow? Yeah, okay. So I think we're comfortable. I mean, cow is typically presentations, information in terms of the different committee reports, and we'll have a lot to share about the launch of the strategic plan, but I think we can build that in July and August regular board meetings even. So I'm comfortable if the board's comfortable
Okay.
postponing that one.
Are we okay to miss the
Cancel.
7th?
I will not be here, so I'm okay.
Oh, well, there you go.
Well, you should have told us at the beginning.
You
Well, I was
should have
hoping
told
it was
us.
Yeah.
going away, and I wouldn't have to say it.
I think it's also nice for our administrators. They have a lot of transitioning to do, and to give them some time to pull things, it's helpful. But I don't want to speak for them, but
It was 2 days after 4th of July weekend, so I don't know if people have
Yeah.
other things going on, but let them enjoy that for a little bit instead of prepping for this.
All right, so it sounds like consensus is we will strike the July 7th meeting. Then, so our next business meeting, regular business meeting will be July 21st. And I actually will be missing that meeting. So watch this space for a different
Okay.
president at the next July
Well,
21st
Linda's
meeting.
gonna have to
That is
stay.
the regular business meeting at 7 PM in the Ames multipurpose room. The board will enter into closed session at 6:30 PM if necessary, and return to open session at 7 PM. And then August 4th, 2021 is the board's self-evaluation in the Ames multipurpose room with Dr. Pepper and Skittles
stop.
at 6
Dan.
to 9 PM.
Oh, my goodness.
So I don't know, is there anything on that that's not a public meeting, not an open meeting?
So the self-evaluation is, when you do it with an IASB representative, it's allowed to be all in closed session, but we would start by having, we would open and then motion to go into closed. And so for that reason, if there was any business to conduct, we could certainly publish an agenda with any necessary items if there were some. We were talking that maybe we'll even use, like, we'd open the meeting in this room and maybe use the library upstairs here as just, maybe that's a slightly nicer meeting space.
That may be nice. Yeah.
It's a more
Yeah.
tight space.
It's a really nice room, actually, that nobody's been able to see this year.
No one can
so-
see it. Yeah.
All right, last point, so we had our closed session earlier, and I think we've agreed that we're going to enter into closed session to continue our discussions. There will be no action following that closed session. So let me go back to, yes, so here we are. So at this time, is there a motion to enter into closed session for the purpose of discussing collective negotiating matters between the district and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees, and the employment compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, specific individuals who serve as independent contractors, or specific volunteers of the district or legal counsel for the district, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee, a specific individual who serves as an independent contractor, or a volunteer of the district, or against legal counsel for the district to determine its validity.
So moved.
Second.
Kathy, can you call the roll?
Mr. Marvel?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Muirhead?
Aye.
Ms. Gunn?
Aye.
Ms. Claver?
Aye.
Mr. Hawes?
Aye.